الله أكبر الله أكبر.
يا ربي لك الحمد حتى ترضى، ولك الحمد إذا ما رضيت، ولك الحمد بعد الرضاء، ولك الحمد أبدا أبدا أبدا. الحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله. والحمد لله الذي لم يتخذ ولدا ولم يكن له شريك في الملك ولم يكن له ولي من الذل وكبره تكبيرا. والحمد لله الذي أنزل على عبده الكتاب ولم يجعل له عوجا. والحمد لله الذي نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونؤمن به ونتوكل عليه، ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا. من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلله فلا هادي له. ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له، ونشهد أن محمدا عبد الله ورسوله أرسله الله تعالى بالهدى ودين الحق ليظهره على الدين كله، وكفى بالله شهيدا. فصلى الله عليه وسلم تسليما كثيرا كثيرا. ثم أما بعد، فإن أصدق الحديث كتاب الله، وخير الهدي هدي محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم، وإن شر الأمور محدثاتها، وإن كل محدثة بدعة، وكل بدعة ضلالة، وكل ضلالة في النار. يقول سبحانه وتعالى في كتابه الكريم بعد أن أقول أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم: واضرب لهم مثل الرجلين جعلنا لأحدهما جنتين من أعناب وحففناهما بنخل وجعلنا بينهما زرعا كلتا الجنتين آتت أكلها ولم تظلم منه شيئا وفجرنا خلالهما نهرا. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. واللهم ثبتنا عند الموت بلا إله إلا الله. واللهم اجعلنا من الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. آمين يا رب العالمين. I was very conflicted about what to share in this khutbah with you today, but I decided that I would focus my attention on one particular passage from Surah Al-Kahf, and I'd like to start by expressing my appreciation and my just pleasant surprise at meeting this community for the first time. I've been traveling across the country for some time now, alhamdulillah, but this is the first time I've been to Wisconsin, and obviously this city also. May Allah Azza wa Jal bless this community and the efforts that are being made in this community. So, what I wanted to share with you is some reminder for myself and for all of you from Surah Al-Kahf, the surah we're supposed to recite every Friday. And before I start talking a little bit about these ayat, I want to share with you an observation that I've been sort of on the side been making about our community and communities across the world in general. A sociological fact that there are lots and lots of families in the world, it doesn't even matter if they're Muslim or not, but they push their children to be successful. This idea of wanting your children to be successful is very common. It doesn't matter if you're a Hindu family or a Buddhist family or you're a Western European family or an American family or Arab family, it doesn't matter. We want our children to be successful. And we define that success in very specific or very similar ways. So for instance, in Chinese culture, you're considered successful at the point where your children are, they've obtained a high degree in education, they've obtained a career, they own a property, they own some patch of real estate, and they've made it, they've paid those things off, and now they're considered successful. And they work and they work and they work towards those things. And actually, in some aspects of that culture, families compete with each other, and the parents, they get together and they share notes on their kids. Well, my kid already finished law school, and my kid is in the middle of med school, but he'll finish soon, and he's already bought this, and he's already bought that. So actually, they compare with each other, and when they find out one of the sons in the community has gone further, they all humiliate their own children, saying, why can't you be more like him? But one thing I realized, that's not just Chinese culture. That's Muslim culture too now. Across the border and across ethnicities and cultures, we push our children to be successful. We look at other families and their kids and what they've attained and what schools they went to and what degrees they got and where they bought a house and how lavish their wedding was, and we want ours to be the same way. We're in this competition all the time. We're almost in this competition. And actually, the more, you don't really look at your child or your success even as a person yourself. You don't even all the time look at your own success, looking at what's good for you or not. You're always comparing yourself to somebody else. You're constantly comparing, well, they did this, and somebody else did that. And that was put into many of us by our parents themselves, who used to put us and our siblings in competition. They used to tell you when you were little, why can't you be more like your brother? He did all of these things, and how come you can't do that? So if one of you, if you have a brother who went to med school, well, your qadr has been written, right? So, because if you went to med school, your parents are going to say, well, your brother did it, what's wrong with you? Why can't you go? It doesn't matter what you were created for, now you've been created for med school. One of my friends told me, one of the scholars I respect a lot told me, the great minds of Western society, people like, even in film, for example, Steven Spielberg. If Steven Spielberg was a Muslim, he'd probably be a doctor, he wouldn't be a producer, right? Because we have certain definitions of success when we push our generations in that direction. I wanted to share this passage with you, because in this passage, Allah Azza wa Jalla talks about two Muslims that are neighbors to each other. One of them is pretty wealthy. And the indication that he's so wealthy is that Allah Azza wa Jalla makes it a point to mention his assets. Now think about that. Allah dedicated ayat of the Quran to describe the assets, the things that this guy owns. That's a pretty big deal that Allah Azza wa Jalla would do that. But I told you there's two people, right? So if you describe the assets of one, then you should expect that the assets, the ownership, the property of the other should be described also. But what you very interestingly find is Allah Azza wa Jalla dedicates two ayat describing this person's assets. The first farmer, gardener, his assets. But the other guy is so negligible in what he owns, Allah doesn't even mention it. What he owns isn't even brought up. So it goes without saying, he's not doing that well financially. Times have hit him tough. And this conversation happens between this very wealthy, I'm telling you again, Muslim, and another Muslim. These two Muslims are having a conversation. And this conversation is recorded. So let's take a peek inside this dialogue that happens, and how I wanted to share with you this is a living conversation. There's not just a conversation that happened many thousands of years ago, and Allah Azza wa Jalla gave us a glimpse of it. This conversation happens every day, between people like you and me. So Allah Azza wa Jalla says, وَضْرِبْ لَهُمْ مَثَلَ الرَّجُلَيْنِ. Give them the example of, strike the example for them of the two men. جَعَلْنَا لِأَحَدِهِمَا جَنَّتَيْنِ مِنْ أَعْنَابٍ. For one of those two men, we gave him two gardens. So one of this guy doesn't even have one property, he has two properties of grapevines. مِنْ أَعْنَابٍ. I used to live in Long Island at some part of my life in New York. And some of the most expensive real estate on Long Island is the vineyards, all the way out east, by the water almost. And these are some of the most expensive real estate even in the country. Vineyards are not cheap. They're expensive to maintain. They're not like any other crop. You have to take a lot of care of them. They're very delicate plants. They can't even stand on their own. You have to put sticks in the ground, and they wrap themselves around the sticks, the trellises. They wrap themselves around. So they don't manage themselves. You know how some plants, they grow on their own, and they can stand on their own, and you don't have to take care of them? These are very delicate plants. They require constant care. And if they require constant care, you need a lot of employees, don't you? You can't just go around in a massive giant farm taking care of every single plant yourself. You have to hire people to do that. So the guy that owns two farms, it kind of goes without saying that he probably had a lot of employees. He had manpower behind him, and Allah Azza wa Jalla described it as such. So he says, جَنَّتَيْنِ مِنْ أَعْنَابٍ وَنَخِيلٍ. And Allah Azza wa Jalla says, so he has gardens of grapevines and of palm. And he goes further to say, وَحَفَفْنَهُمَا بِنَخْلٍ. It's not nakhil, but وَحَفَفْنَهُمَا بِنَخْلٍ. We fortified his gardens with palm trees. Now this is very interesting. I want you to imagine this picture. There's grapevines, these really delicate plants in the middle, a huge field of them. And all around there are palm trees. Like the fence is not a wooden fence, it's a fence of trees. And that's important because if the wind blows, these plants can get damaged. So his idea of protecting these plants is to put these gigantic palm trees all around, and that's his security system. So when the wind hits, it hits the trees first. It doesn't hit the plants first. So not only does he have a very good investment, he's got a very good security system too. And obviously the palm trees themselves are producers of wealth for him. So he's got money on top of money on top of money. But additionally, what do you need? You need other kinds of crop too. Actually, before I go there, Allah Azza wa Jalla says, وَجَعَلْنَا بَيْنَهُمَا زَرْعًا. Between the two of them, there were also additional farmland. So this is just two of the things he has that Allah highlights. The more exotic assets, he has even more. كِلْتَا الْجَنَّتَيْنِ آتَتْ أُكُلَهَا. You know, if those of you, I mean many of us are not in farming, but those of you that come from backgrounds that you know about farmland and farming, it's a very stressful work. You have to work the entire year, and it's, you know, now many of you have jobs now, you get a paycheck every week. Or you get a paycheck every 2 weeks. In farming, you get one paycheck a year. You have to work the entire year, and at the end of it, when the crop comes out, that's when you get paid. And even that paycheck is not guaranteed. It's not guaranteed because it could be there's a drought, or there are insects that came into your farm, something went wrong, there was overheating, right? There was a flood, all kinds of problems can happen, and your entire years of work is gone. In this blink of an eye, it's gone. And you can't recover it. That's the life of a farmer. It's very, very stressful. It's very difficult. But Allah Azza wa Jal describes His farm as آتَتْ أُكُلَهَا. It used to give, both of these gardens, they used to produce their food. In other words, they were at 100% production. Year after year after year, things were going well, no weather problems, no insect problems, everything was taken care of. So, you know, and in farming, if things go well, you make a lot of money. You know, you make a lot of money. So he was doing very, very, very well. And so Allah is still describing the first neighbor. He hasn't even talked about the second neighbor yet, subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he says, وَلَمْ تَظْلِمْ مِنْهُ شَيْئًا. You know how you say, our farm produced 80%, 50%, 70%. لَمْ تَظْلِمْ مِنْهُ شَيْئًا. Not a thing was missing. Not one plant didn't produce. He was getting 100% out of his farm. وَفَجَّرْنَا خِلَالَهُمَا نَهَرًا. And the only thing missing now in a farm, you know, if you travel in the Midwest especially, you'll see farms that are being irrigated, right? So you have these machines that spray the water. But what in old times, you had to have animals that go and deliver the water every place. Allah Azza wa Jalla says that between the two, we had caused a spring to come out. So he's got two gardens, two huge properties, and between them there's a water supply by Allah Azza wa Jalla. And he takes credit for it himself. And that's the thing I want to highlight and go back a little bit. Allah Azza wa Jalla says, وَحَفَفْنَا لَهُمَا بِنَهْرٍ. He says, وَفَجَّرْنَا خِلَالَهُمَا نَهَرًا. Every time Allah mentions His assets, He says, we fortified it with palm trees. Allah did. We made a spring flow in between. He didn't say the farmer owned it. Allah says, I gave it to him, I gave it to him, I gave it to him. So even before we get to the lessons of the ayat, we're already being taught lessons. This rich man is not rich because he's very intelligent, he made some very smart investment decisions. He's rich because Allah made him this way. Allah took credit throughout the ayat even. Even as you're reading these ayat, you don't think, wow, this guy must have been a really good businessman. You're thinking, wow, Allah really blessed him. Allah doesn't take credit away from Himself as even describing His assets. Now what happens one day? وَكَانَ لَهُ ثَمَرٌ. And the one who used to own a lot of fruit, in other words, the guy that had a lot of wealth, the wealthy one. He's one day in a conversation with his buddy next door. The guy next door, you know, he lives in one of those old homes that you think should be demolished and then it should be rebuilt nicely. He lives in one of those properties, you know, and he's next door. So one day they're just, you know, talking to each other, and it just comes up. فَقَالَ لِصَاحِبِهِ. He says to his companion, the guy sees all the time, وَهُوَ يُحَاوِرُهُ. هذا مهم جدا. وَهُوَ يُحَاوِرُهُ. And in the middle of just kind of conversing with him, الحوار يعني الكلام, المحادثة. He's just talking to him, they're just chit-chatting, and in the middle of the conversation he slipped in something. أَنَا أَكْثَرُ مِنْكَ مَالًا وَأَعَزُّ نَفَرًا. You know, I am more than you when it comes to money. And I do have a lot more than you when it comes to manpower, children, sons, helpers, employees. I got a lot more than you. Now you have to understand, this is not how you would imagine the rich guy came out of his house, went over to his neighbor, knocked on his door, the neighbor opened his door and said, by the way, I wanted to tell you, I'm richer than you. Assalamu alaikum. That's not how it happened. That's not what's being told to us. وَهُوَ يُحَاوِرُهُ is important because they're talking about other things. And he kind of slips it in. He slips it in. He lets him feel like he's poor and the other guy's rich. He doesn't say directly, he inserts it in the conversation. So you know, for example, you have some of you younger guys, you go to college. And alhamdulillah, you come from wealthy families. So you drive your BMW to school. And you have a friend who also goes to the same college, but he's barely making tuition. He's living in an apartment with like 8 other guys because he can't afford it. And he takes the bus there or walks to school. And you're like, yeah, man, just got the Beamer. It's a good deal. It's just $25,000. It's a good deal though. How'd you get to school? You kind of just slip it in, like poke him a little with it. You're not saying directly, I am wealthier than you are, sir. Assalamu alaikum. You're not doing that. But you are making him feel insignificant. Some of you elders do this. Yeah, our daughter's wedding, mashallah, we only held it at the Crown Plaza. It was only $50 a plate. You know, mashallah. It was very good. It could have been better though, because we got a good deal because they were asking for $80. What about your daughter's nikah at the masjid, right? Right? Just kind of slip it in. Poke people. Let people know that you've got more than them. You don't say it directly. You attack people and make them feel less by what Allah has given you. And this attitude, even you're not saying it directly, you're not saying anything. And if you talk to them, why do you talk like that? I was like, I didn't say anything. I was just talking about my daughter's wedding. I was just talking about this car. It's a really good deal I got. I didn't say anything harmful. You can defend yourself very easily. Even if this farmer was stopped and told, why do you talk like that? He goes, oh, I was just talking, man. I'm just saying. It's no big deal. وَهُوَ يُحَاوِرُهُ أَنَا أَكْثَرُ مِنْ كَمَالًا وَأَعَزُّ نَفْرًا. I have more authority when it comes to employees. Yeah, just, this year I'm downsizing. I only got like 15 employees this year. How many people? You work by yourself, right? Yeah. Good luck with that. And just this kind of condescending behavior. And there's more before we go on. In Muslim community, in all societies, one of the great sources of corruption is wealthy people imposing their lifestyle as a standard on poorer people. So poorer people feel like they are living a miserable life until they live the life of rich people. So you'll find in struggling communities across the world, and the United States is no exception, in the Muslims the easiest example to give is the wedding. Easiest example of all. Your family has a modest income. Maybe you make $50,000 a year. Maybe you make